I never thought I'd be the guy writing this kind of story. You read posts about cheating spouses and think, that'll never happen to me. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, and now, I'm standing in the wreckage of my marriage, trying to make sense of it all. Lindsay and I had been married for 9 years. We had what I thought was a solid relationship. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but who doesn't? She was the love of my life, the one I saw myself growing old with. We had this rhythm together, a kind of shorthand that only comes after years of being with someone. Or at least, I thought we did. Things started to feel off a few months ago. Lindsay was more distant, her attention wandering during our conversations. She wasn't the same playful, open person I'd known for nearly a decade. Instead, she was glued to her phone more often than not, typing furiously with this look, like she was in on some inside joke that didn't involve me. It wasn't just the phone, though. She started dressing differently, too. Lindsay always had a great sense of style, but suddenly, she was putting way more effort into her appearance for things like running errands, or grabbing coffee with an old friend. I chalked it up to her wanting to feel good about herself. Who was I to question that? But then there were the late nights. A few times a week, she'd come home hours after her workday ended, claiming she was catching up with old friends or attending a book club she joined with some of her old college pals. I didn't press her at first because I didn't want to be that guy, you know, the insecure, overpossessive husband who gets paranoid over nothing. The first real crack appeared one night when she came home smelling like cologne that definitely wasn't mine. She claimed it was her friend Mike, a guy she'd known from college. He apparently hugged her goodbye after they caught up over drinks. It felt weird, sure, but Lindsay brushed it off so easily that I didn't push the issue. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, though. You know how people talk about their gut instincts? Well, mine was practically screaming at me, but I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was overthinking things, that Lindsay loved me and would never do anything to hurt me. But then there was the reunion invite. Lindsay's college class was having their 10-year reunion, and she was beyond excited about it. She talked about it nonstop for weeks, going on and on about seeing her old friends and how much fun it would be. I thought it was sweet at first, nostalgia and all that. What bothered me was this name that kept coming up in her stories, Tyler. Tyler was her classmate, and apparently, a big part of her college years. She mentioned him in passing before, but now, every story about her college days seemed to involve him. Tyler was so funny, she'd say. Or, Tyler always knew how to get everyone laughing. At one point, she even told me, Tyler used to beat me at everything, games, debates, you name it. She laughed it off, but the way she said his name stuck with me. I asked her if Tyler was coming to the reunion, and she said, oh, probably. He's a bit of a show-off, so he wouldn't miss a chance to catch up with everyone. She laughed, but there was something in her tone that didn't sit right. The night of the reunion, Lindsay spent hours getting ready. She looked amazing, more dressed up than I'd seen her in years. When she noticed me watching her, she gave me this playful smile and said, What? It's a big night. I want to look good. Who for? I teased, trying to keep it light. She rolled her eyes. You, obviously. That was the first time in a long while that I felt a pang of doubt. It wasn't anything she said, it was the way she avoided looking at me when she answered. When she got back that night, she was buzzing with energy, talking a mile a minute about the people she saw, the drinks they had, and the laughs they shared. But Tyler's name came up more than a few times. He'd apparently made quite the impression. Just like old times. I wanted to brush it off, but something about the way she talked about him didn't sit right. Her eyes lit up every time she mentioned his name, and her smile seemed different, more animated. And then I made the mistake of checking her phone the next morning. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe I wanted reassurance that I was being paranoid. But what I found were texts between her and Tyler. They weren't outright incriminating, but they had this playful, flirtatious tone that I hadn't seen from Lindsay in years. It was like she was a different person when she was talking to him, more alive, more invested. That's when the pit in my stomach turned into something heavier. After seeing those texts, my mind was spinning. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was reading too much into things. It's not like there was anything explicit in their messages. Still, the way Lindsay wrote to him, all light and teasing, was so different from how she talked to me. She'd say things like, "You haven't changed at all, Ty," and "Still the undefeated champion, huh? Guess I'll never live that one down." There was even a message where she joked, "Careful, or I might have to take you up on that rematch." Rematch? I didn't know what she meant, but the way Tyler responded, "Anytime, anywhere, winky face," made my skin crawl. I told myself I couldn't jump to conclusions. Lindsay had always been a social butterfly, and she had plenty of guy friends from before we got together. Maybe this was just her catching up with an old friend, nothing more. Still, something didn't sit right. I decided not to confront her, yet. Instead, I started paying closer attention to her behavior. And let me tell you, it didn't take long before things got stranger. Over the next few weeks, Lindsay became even more distant. She'd go out, for coffee, more often, sometimes not coming home until late at night. When I asked her about it, she'd give me vague answers. "Oh, just catching up with Sarah." Or, "Lost track of time, sorry." She always had an excuse, but the pieces didn't add up. One night, I suggested we have a date night, just the two of us. It had been a while since we'd spent quality time together, and I thought it might help bring us closer. But when I brought it up, Lindsay barely looked up from her phone. "Date night? This week?" she asked, frowning slightly. "Yeah. We haven't gone out in ages," I said. She hesitated, then quickly smiled. "Sure. Let me check my schedule." But her enthusiasm felt forced, and when the night came, she canceled last minute, claiming she had a work emergency. I tried to brush it off, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The tipping point came when I overheard a phone call. Lindsay was in the living room, laughing quietly into the phone while I was in the kitchen making dinner. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her voice carried, and I couldn't help but catch bits of the conversation. "You're so bad," she giggled, her voice soft. "I can't believe you still remember that." I strained to hear more, but she must have noticed I was nearby because she quickly ended the call. When I walked into the room, she was scrolling through her phone, pretending like nothing had happened. "Who was that?" I asked casually. "Just Sarah," she said without looking up. But the way she said it was too quick, too rehearsed. My heart sank. I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. Lindsay wasn't just drifting away, she was hiding something. That night, after she fell asleep, I checked her phone again. I knew it was wrong, but at this point, I was desperate for answers. And this time, I found something I couldn't ignore. She and Tyler had been texting almost every day since the reunion. Their messages were mostly playful and casual, but there was an undercurrent of something more. In one conversation, she mentioned, "I still can't believe you made that bet. You're such a cheat." And Tyler replied, "A deal's a deal, Linz. Don't back out now, winky face." My blood ran cold. What bet? What deal? The next morning, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Who's Tyler?" I asked as we sat down for breakfast. Lindsay froze for a split second, but then she smiled. "Tyler? Oh, just an old friend from college. I told you about him, remember?" "Yeah, I remember," I said carefully. "You've been texting him a lot lately." Her smile faltered, and she shifted in her seat. "We're just catching up." "It's nothing, really." "Then why are you deleting some of your messages?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and showed her screenshots I'd taken of the texts before she deleted them. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed to know the truth. Her eyes widened, and she looked like a deer caught in headlights. "You went through my phone?" "Don't deflect," I said, my voice rising. "What's going on with you and Tyler?" For a moment, she just sat there, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the right words. Finally, she said, "It's not what you think. Tyler and we're just friends." But the way she said it, the hesitation in her voice, told me everything I needed to know. After her half-hearted excuse, I stared at Lindsay, waiting for her to say more. Her "just friends" line wasn't enough, not after what I'd seen. "Friends?" I repeated, leaning forward. "Then why are you deleting your messages? Why do you sound so different when you talk to him?" Lindsay fidgeted with her coffee mug, her eyes darting everywhere but at me. "It's not like that, okay?" she snapped, her voice tinged with frustration. "I knew you'd overreact if you saw the texts, which is why I didn't want you to." "Overreact?" I said, my voice sharp. "You've been lying to me, Lindsay." "Sneaking around, deleting messages, what am I supposed to think?" She sighed, exasperated. "Tyler and I made a dumb bet back in college, and he's been teasing me about it since the reunion. That's all it is." "What kind of bet?" I pressed, my gut churning. "It was stupid," she muttered, her face turning red. "We bet on a game of pool one night. I lost, and he's been joking about it ever since." Her explanation felt too neat, too rehearsed. But I didn't have anything concrete to counter it with, yet. "If it's so harmless, why are you hiding it from me?" I asked. "Because I knew you'd blow it out of proportion," she shot back, her eyes flashing with anger. "It's nothing, okay? I haven't done anything wrong." I wanted to believe her, I really did. But my instincts were screaming at me that she wasn't telling the whole truth. "Lindsay, if there's more to this, you need to tell me now. Don't make me find out some other way." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to explain every little thing I do to you," she said, her voice icy. "Maybe you should think about why you don't trust me anymore." With that, she stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. For the next few days, things between us were tense. Lindsay acted like nothing had happened, but I could feel the distance growing. She'd barely look at me, let alone talk to me about what was going on. And Tyler's name loomed in the back of my mind like a dark cloud. I decided to do some digging. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. I started with her social media. Lindsay wasn't big on posting, but Tyler? His profile was wide open, and it didn't take long to find something suspicious. A photo from the reunion. It was a group shot, Lindsay and her old classmates gathered around a pool table, laughing and holding drinks. But what caught my eye was the way Tyler was standing next to her, his arm draped casually over her shoulder. Lindsay's smile was bright, but there was something about the way she leaned into him that made my stomach twist. The caption read, "Reunion champs still undefeated. Better luck next time, Lynn's winky face." I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their bet than she'd admitted. And if Tyler was posting this kind of thing publicly, what was happening behind closed doors? A week later, Lindsay told me she was going to a book club meeting. I knew she was lying, the way she avoided my eyes, the quick, clipped way she explained her plans. She was going to see him. I followed her. I know how that sounds, but I needed to know the truth. I waited until she left the house, then tailed her car at a safe distance. My heart was pounding the entire time, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. She didn't go to a coffee shop or someone's house. She went to a hotel. I parked a few spots away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I watched as she stepped out of her car, dressed to the nines, and walked into the building without looking back. My world shattered in that moment. I could have confronted her right then and there, but something in me held back. I needed proof, real proof. If I burst in now, she'd just deny everything or twist the story somehow. So I sat there, stewing in my anger, and waited. An hour later, Tyler showed up. I recognized him immediately from the reunion photo, tall, confident, with that smug grin plastered across his face. He walked into the hotel like he owned the place, completely unaware that I was watching. I felt like I was going to explode. I sat there in my car, frozen with rage as Tyler strolled into the hotel like he didn't have a care in the world. My mind raced, cycling through every possible scenario, every explanation Lindsay might throw at me if I confronted her. But deep down, I already knew the truth. After what felt like an eternity, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not anymore. I waited a few more minutes to calm my nerves, then stepped out of the car. My heart pounded as I walked into the hotel lobby, scanning the room for any sign of them. The receptionist glanced at me as I approached the front desk, probably noticing the tension radiating off me. "Excuse me," I said, forcing my voice to sound steady. "My wife just checked in. I think I left my wallet in her bag. Could you tell me what room Lindsay Thompson is in?" The receptionist hesitated, her polite smile faltering. "I'm sorry, sir. We can't give out room numbers. She's expecting me." I cut in, leaning on the counter. "It's an emergency." Her hesitation told me she wasn't completely convinced, but before she could push back further, a guest stepped up to the desk behind me. She gave me a forced smile and gestured toward the elevator. "You might want to check the second floor." I took that as my cue and headed for the elevator, my blood boiling with every step. The second floor hallway stretched before me, eerily quiet except for the faint hum of a vending machine. I didn't know exactly which room they were in, but I figured I'd find out soon enough. I started walking, listening for voices, movement, anything that would give them away. And then I heard it, laughter. I stopped in my tracks, my fists clenching at my sides. Lindsay's laugh, light and carefree, mixed with Tyler's deeper chuckle. They were inside the room at the end of the hall. I don't remember what went through my mind in that moment. All I knew was that I wasn't leaving until I had answers. I pounded on the door. The laughter stopped instantly. "Lindsay!" I barked, my voice loud enough to echo down the hallway. "Open the door!" For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then I heard hurried footsteps inside, followed by the sound of muffled voices. They were scrambling, probably panicking. "Lindsay, I know you're in there!" I shouted, slamming my fist against the door again. "Don't make me call security!" Finally, the door opened just a crack, and there she was. Lindsay's face was pale, her hair slightly disheveled, and her eyes wide with a mix of shock and fear. What are you doing here?" she stammered, trying to sound composed but failing miserably. "What am I doing here?" I said, my voice low and dangerous. "What are you doing here, Lindsay?" "With him." Her face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she might start crying. But then she straightened up, her expression shifting to defiance. "You're overreacting," she said. "It's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like," I snapped, my anger boiling over. "You're at a hotel with another man, Lindsay. What exactly am I supposed to think?" Before she could answer, Tyler appeared behind her, shirt untucked and wearing a smirk that made me want to knock him out. "Hey man, calm down," he said, holding up his hands. "This isn't as bad as you think." I stared at him, incredulous. "You've got to be kidding me." Lindsay stepped in front of him, her voice trembling. "It's not what you think, okay? Tyler and I were just..." "Just what?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Don't even try to lie to me, Lindsay. I know everything. The texts, the sneaking around, the reunion, you've been lying to me for weeks." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Tyler, on the other hand, looked completely unbothered. "Look," he said, shrugging. "If you're going to be mad at someone, be mad at her. She made the bet. She lost." My head snapped toward Lindsay. "What bet?" I demanded. Her face went beet red, and she looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "Tyler," she hissed through clenched teeth. "Shut up." "No," I said, stepping closer. "I want to hear it from him." "What bet, Lindsay?" Tyler crossed his arms, a smug grin spreading across his face. "Back in college, Lindsay bet me she could beat me at pool. She lost. The deal was that she'd pay up if we ever had a chance to settle it. Guess who decided to make good on the bet?" I turned to Lindsay, my stomach twisting in knots. Is that true? I asked, my voice trembling. She finally looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, she whispered. It was stupid, I wasn't thinking. Not thinking? I roared, the weight of her betrayal hitting me like a freight train. You made a bet to sleep with him, and you actually went through with it? How could you do this, Lindsay? How could you throw away everything we've built for this? Lindsay stood frozen in the doorway, her tears streaking her flushed cheeks, but I didn't care. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd built a life with, had gambled our marriage away on some reckless, humiliating bet. Answer me, I demanded, my voice raw. How could you do this to us? She glanced at Tyler, who had the nerve to look amused, then back at me. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she said, her voice trembling. We were just reminiscing about old times, and one thing led to another. Stop, I cut her off, holding up my hand. Don't insult me with excuses. You made a bet to sleep with him. This wasn't some accident, Lindsay. You planned this. Her shoulders sagged, and she clutched the doorframe for support. It was stupid, she whispered, her voice cracking. I wasn't thinking about the consequences. Clearly, I snapped, glaring at her. Because if you were, you'd have realized you were throwing away everything for what? A cheap thrill? Tyler stepped forward, and I immediately bristled. Hey man, if it makes you feel any better, it wasn't personal, he said, his tone annoyingly casual. Shut your mouth, I snarled, stepping toward him. This isn't about you. It's about her. Tyler raised his hands in mock surrender, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. All right. I'll leave you two to sort this out. He glanced at Lindsay. Call me later if you want to talk. Before I could stop myself, I grabbed the door and slammed it shut in his face. You're not going anywhere, I said to Lindsay, my voice low but seething with anger. Not until you explain how the hell we ended up here. She sank onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, the room was silent except for her quiet sobs. I wanted to yell, to scream, but all I could feel was the crushing weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. I don't know what to say, she finally said, her voice muffled. I've made a mess of everything. I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't just hurt me, Lindsay, I said, my voice breaking. You destroyed us. Do you even realize what you've done? What this means for our family? She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. I know, she whispered. I know I've ruined everything, but please don't give up on us. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The audacity of her to ask for forgiveness, to cling to the life she'd so recklessly jeopardized, was almost too much to bear. How can you ask me that? I said, shaking my head. How can you expect me to just move past this? To look at you the same way again? I'll do whatever it takes, she said, her voice desperate. Counseling, therapy, anything. Just don't walk away. Don't leave me. I couldn't think. My mind was a chaotic storm of anger, sadness, and disbelief. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, to slam the door on this entire nightmare and never look back. But another part of me, some small, stubborn part, wanted answers. I needed to understand why she'd thrown our life away for a meaningless fling. That night I didn't go home. I couldn't. I left Lindsay in that hotel room and drove aimlessly through the city, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Memories of our life together flashed through my mind, our wedding day, the birth of our daughter, the quiet evenings spent laughing and talking about the future. And now, it was all in ruins. Eventually, I found myself parked outside my best friend Brian's house. He'd been my go-to guy since college, the one person I could always count on for support. I sat in the car for a few minutes, debating whether to knock on his door. It was late, and I hated the idea of burdening him with my problems, but I needed someone to talk to. When Brian opened the door and saw me standing there, his expression shifted from confusion to concern. Dude, what's going on? he asked, stepping aside to let me in. I didn't know where to start. How do you explain to someone that your wife of 9 years cheated on you over a stupid bet? But as soon as I sat down on his couch, the words started pouring out. Brian listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hands over his face. Wow, he finally said. That's messed up, man. Yeah, I said, my voice hollow. What are you going to do? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to pack her stuff and tell her to get out. But then I think about our daughter, and I don't know if I can do that to her. Brian nodded, his expression thoughtful. You've got to take some time to think this through. Don't make any decisions in the heat of the moment. Easier said than done, I muttered. For the rest of the night, Brian did his best to distract me. We watched a movie, drank a couple of beers, and talked about anything but Lindsay. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the gnawing pain in my chest. The next morning, I woke up on Brian's couch, groggy and disoriented. For a brief moment, I forgot where I was and why I was there, but reality hit me like a freight train as soon as I sat up. Lindsay. Tyler. The hotel room. Morning, Brian said, walking into the living room with 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to me and sat down in the chair across from the couch. You sleep at all? Barely, I muttered, taking a sip. The bitterness of the coffee matched my mood perfectly. You ready to face her? He asked, his voice cautious. I shook my head. Not yet. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, Brian said. Take the time you need to figure out what you want. But don't let her manipulate you. She screwed up, not you. I nodded, grateful for his advice but still feeling lost. I need to go home eventually, I said, staring into my coffee. Yeah, but only when you're ready, Brian said. Not because she wants to sweep this under the rug. I stayed at Brian's for a few more hours, trying to collect my thoughts. Finally, around noon, I decided it was time to go back. I couldn't avoid Lindsay forever, and I needed to figure out what the hell we were going to do next. When I walked through the door of our house, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Normally, our daughter would be playing or watching cartoons, and Lindsay would be bustling around, tidying up or working on something. But now, the silence was deafening. Lindsay? I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. She appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale and drawn. You're back, she said softly, descending the steps. Where's Emily? I asked, referring to our daughter. She's at my mom's, Lindsay replied. I thought it would be better if we had some time to talk. I nodded, setting my keys down on the counter. Good. We need to talk. She gestured toward the living room, and we both sat down on opposite ends of the couch. For a moment neither of us spoke. The tension in the air was suffocating. I'm sorry, Lindsay said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know how much I regret what I did. I looked at her, my emotions swirling between anger and sadness. You regret it now because you got caught, I said, my voice flat. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. You're right, she admitted. I've been selfish and reckless. I wasn't thinking about you or Emily or anyone but myself. Why, Lindsay? I asked, my voice breaking. Why would you risk everything for him? For a stupid bet? She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I don't know, she said, her voice trembling. Tyler brought back all these memories of who I used to be, before the responsibilities, before life got so hard. I felt like I'd lost myself, and when he came back into my life, I let myself get carried away. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. So what? You wanted to relive your college days, and you decided screwing him was the way to do it? Do you even realize how pathetic that sounds? I know, she whispered. I hate myself for what I've done. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm begging you, don't give up on us. I leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling as I tried to process her words. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to throw her out of the house and never look back. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, wanted to understand. "What about Emily?" I asked finally, my voice strained. "Do you even realize what this could do to her?" Lindsay nodded, her tears falling faster. "She's all I've been thinking about since you left," she said. "I can't believe I've jeopardized our family like this. I'll do anything to fix it, therapy, counseling, whatever it takes." Her desperation was palpable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too little, too late. "I need time," I said, standing up. "I can't just forgive you overnight, Lindsay. This isn't something you can just apologize for and expect everything to go back to normal." "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'll do whatever you need me to do." I walked upstairs, leaving her alone in the living room. Once inside our bedroom, I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal, and a tiny flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. But for now, all I could do was take it one step at a time. The next few days felt like walking through a fog. Lindsay tried to stay out of my way, tiptoeing around the house as if I might explode at any moment. Every interaction between us was strained, filled with unspoken words and heavy silences. I spent most of my time at work or driving aimlessly around town, trying to escape the suffocating tension at home. But no matter where I went, the same questions haunted me. Could I ever forgive her? Could I live with this betrayal? And then there was Tyler. The thought of him made my blood boil. The smug look on his face when I confronted them in that hotel room replayed in my mind on a loop. He had no shame, no remorse, and the fact that Lindsay had chosen to betray me with someone like him made it even worse. One night, unable to take the silence anymore, I called Brian. "Hey," I said when he answered. "Hey, man. How are you holding up?" "Barely," I admitted. "I can't stop thinking about it." "Have you decided what you're going to do yet?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, running a hand through my hair. "Part of me wants to try to make it work, for Emily's sake. But another part of me feels like I'll never be able to trust her again." Brian was quiet for a moment before saying, "Look, whatever you decide, you need to do it for you. Don't stay just because you feel like you have to. And don't leave if you think there's a chance to rebuild. But don't rush it either. Take your time." "Yeah," I said, though his words didn't make the decision any easier. The following evening, I came home to find Lindsay in the kitchen, making dinner. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air, a scent that once would have made me feel at home. Now, it just felt hollow. "Hey," she said softly, glancing up at me. "Hey," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I made your favorite," she said, gesturing to the stovetop. "Chicken Alfredo." I nodded, not sure what to say. I knew she was trying to make amends, but it felt like putting a band-aid on a bullet wound. We ate in silence, the clinking of forks against plates the only sound in the room. After we finished, Lindsay cleared her throat. "I've been thinking," she said hesitantly, "about us. About what happens next." "And?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "I want to fight for us," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I've messed up in ways that I can't even begin to make up for, but I love you, and I want to try to fix this, if you'll let me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. "How do you expect me to trust you again?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. "You lied to me for weeks, Lindsay. You betrayed me in the worst way possible. How am I supposed to just move on from that?" "I don't expect you to," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm committed to this marriage. I'm not giving up on us." The next morning, I decided to take her up on her offer. If she wanted to prove herself, I'd let her, but on my terms. "We're going to counseling," I told her over breakfast. Lindsay looked up from her coffee, her eyes wide. "Okay," she said quickly. "I'll set it up." No, I said firmly. I'll set it up. And you're going to be honest, Lindsay. About everything. No more half-truths, no more deflections. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. She nodded, her expression serious. I understand. I found a therapist who specialized in infidelity and marital issues and scheduled our first session for later that week. The first session was awkward, to say the least. We sat in the therapist's office, a small room with neutral-colored walls and a cozy couch, while Dr. Simmons, a calm, middle-aged woman with kind eyes, asked us to share our story. Lindsay went first, recounting how she'd reconnected with Tyler at the reunion and how their relationship had spiraled out of control. Hearing her describe it in such detail felt like being stabbed all over again. When it was my turn, I let it all out, the betrayal, the anger, the humiliation of discovering my wife in a hotel room with another man. Dr. Simmons listened attentively, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. By the end of the session, I felt emotionally drained. Lindsay looked the same, her face pale and her hands trembling. This is just the beginning, Dr. Simmons said gently. Rebuilding trust takes time, effort, and transparency from both of you. Are you both willing to commit to this process? I am, Lindsay said immediately. I hesitated, then nodded. I'll try. After that first therapy session, things shifted slightly at home. The tension didn't disappear, but it softened, replaced by an uneasy truce. Lindsay started going out of her way to be more open, telling me where she was going, who she was with, even sharing her phone passcode. Part of me appreciated the effort, but another part couldn't help but wonder if it was all just an act. How many times before had she told me everything was fine while sneaking around behind my back? The second session with Dr. Simmons was harder. She asked Lindsay to delve deeper into her motivations for cheating, to confront the reasons she'd risked everything we'd built. I don't even know where to start, Lindsay said, her voice shaky. Start with the truth, Dr. Simmons said gently. Lindsay took a deep breath, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I guess I felt stuck, she admitted. Our life had become so routine, work, parenting, bills. I felt like I wasn't alive anymore. I stared at her, my chest tightening. So you decided to screw Tyler to feel alive? It wasn't about him, she said quickly, looking at me with pleading eyes. It could have been anyone, honestly. He just happened to be there, reminding me of a time when I felt free. Like I wasn't tied down by responsibilities. Her words stung, but they also confused me. Tied down? Lindsay, we built this life together. You weren't tied down, you were part of it. I know, she said, her voice breaking. And I hate myself for taking it for granted. But at the time, I couldn't see that. I was selfish and stupid, and I didn't stop to think about what I was risking. Dr. Simmons stepped in, her voice calm but firm. Lindsay, have you truly confronted the impact your actions have had on your husband? On your family? Lindsay nodded, tears streaming down her face. Every day I see it. And I hate myself for it. I sat there, my emotions swirling. Her words were raw and honest, but they didn't make the pain go away. If anything, they only deepened the wound. Over the next few weeks, the therapy sessions forced us to confront things we'd avoided for years. We talked about the ways we both neglected our marriage, her feelings of being stuck, my tendency to bury myself in work. It wasn't easy. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield, and more than once, I wondered if it was worth it. One night, after a particularly grueling session, I decided to ask the question that had been haunting me since the beginning. Was it just a bet? I asked as we sat on the couch, the silence between us heavy. Lindsay looked at me, her eyes wide. What do you mean? Was sleeping with him just about the bet? I clarified. Or was there more to it? She hesitated, and my stomach dropped. It started with the bet, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But after that, I think I got caught up in the attention. Tyler made me feel wanted in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I clenched my fists, anger flaring in my chest. And I didn't make you feel wanted? It wasn't that, she said quickly, tears welling in her eyes. You're an amazing husband, but over the years, we just stopped seeing each other. We became parents, partners, roommates, but we stopped being us. Her words cut deep, but I couldn't deny there was some truth to them. The past few years had been a blur of work and parenting, with little time left for anything else. But that didn't excuse what she'd done. You should have talked to me, I said, my voice shaking. You should have told me how you were feeling instead of turning to him. I know, she whispered, her tears falling freely. I failed you. I failed us. That night, I lay awake in bed, replaying her words over and over in my mind. I thought about our early years together, the passion and excitement that had once defined our relationship. Somewhere along the way, we'd lost that spark, but whose fault was that? Hers? Mine? Both of ours? The next morning, I found myself staring at Emily as she played with her toys in the living room. Her laughter filled the air, pure and unburdened by the mess Lindsay and I had created. Daddy, look, she said, holding up a drawing she'd made. I smiled, trying to push my thoughts aside. That's beautiful, sweetheart. As she beamed up at me, I felt a pang of guilt. No matter what happened between Lindsay and me, Emily deserved better than this. She deserved parents who could provide her with a stable, loving home. But could I really give her that with Lindsay? Days turned into weeks, and while therapy forced Lindsay and me to confront our issues, it didn't magically fix everything. I still felt a wall between us, a barrier of mistrust and resentment that no amount of honesty seemed to break. Lindsay, to her credit, was doing everything she could to rebuild what we had. She went above and beyond to be transparent, answering every question I had, no matter how painful. She even blocked Tyler on every platform and made sure I saw her do it. But none of it could erase the image of them together, laughing in that hotel room, the smug look on Tyler's face as if he'd won something. One evening, after Emily went to bed, Lindsay sat down next to me on the couch. I've been thinking, she said hesitantly. About what? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. About what I can do to help you heal, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to make things right. I've been looking into individual therapy for myself, to work on the things that led me to this. I stared at her, surprised. You think that'll help? I don't know, she admitted. But I have to try. For you. For Emily. For myself. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Lindsay's willingness to take responsibility for her actions, to dig deeper into the why, gave me a sliver of reassurance that maybe, just maybe, she was serious about changing. But even as Lindsay worked on herself, I couldn't stop thinking about Tyler. His arrogance, his smugness, it haunted me. The way he'd brushed off my anger, acting like he hadn't just played a part in destroying my family, made my blood boil. One night, unable to shake the thoughts, I called Brian. I need to do something, I said as soon as he answered. Do what? He asked cautiously. Confront Tyler. I can't just let him walk away from this like it's no big deal. Man, I get it, Brian said. But what's that going to accomplish? He's not worth it. It's not about him, I said. It's about me. I need closure. There was a long pause before Brian finally sighed. All right. But don't do anything stupid. The next day, I drove to Tyler's office. He worked at a marketing firm downtown, and I knew from the reunion chatter that he was a mid-level manager there. I waited outside the building, pacing back and forth as I tried to calm my nerves. When Tyler finally walked out, his usual cocky demeanor on full display, I felt a surge of anger rise within me. Tyler! I called out, my voice sharp. He turned, his face registering mild surprise before morphing into a smirk. Well, if it isn't Mr. Thompson, he said, crossing his arms. What brings you here? I want answers, I said, stepping closer. Answers? He repeated, raising an eyebrow. Haven't you gotten enough of those from Lindsay? My fists clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. Why did you do it? Why go after a married woman? Was it just some game to you? He shrugged, completely unfazed. Look, man, Lindsay's an adult. She made her own choices. If you're looking for someone to blame, maybe take a long, hard look in the mirror. His words hit like a slap in the face, but I refused to let him get to me. You knew she was married, I said through gritted teeth. You knew what this would do to my family. And yet here we are, he said, his smirk widening. Maybe you should have done a better job keeping her happy. That was it. I lunged at him, grabbing the collar of his shirt and shoving him against the wall. Don't you dare put this on me, I growled, my face inches from his. You're nothing but a coward who preys on other people's lives because you can't build one of your own. Tyler's smirk faltered for a split second, but he quickly regained his composure. All right, big guy, he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. You've made your point. Now let go before I call security. I released him, my chest heaving with anger. Stay away from my wife, I said, my voice low and dangerous. If I ever see you near her again, you'll regret it. He straightened his shirt, his smirk returning. Don't worry, he said. She's all yours. When I got home that evening, Lindsay immediately noticed something was off. What happened? She asked, her voice filled with concern. I confronted Tyler, I said, collapsing onto the couch. Her face paled. What did he say? Nothing that matters, I said, rubbing my temples. I just needed him to know I'm not going to let him mess with our lives anymore. Lindsay sat down beside me, her expression torn between guilt and relief. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? I asked, looking at her. For bringing him back into our lives, she said. For everything I've put you through. Her sincerity was evident, but it didn't erase the pain. Still, for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of control, like I was starting to reclaim my life, piece by piece. After confronting Tyler, I thought I'd feel a sense of closure, but it was fleeting at best. The anger that had fueled me began to dissipate, leaving behind an ache I couldn't shake. I wasn't just angry at Tyler or Lindsay anymore. I was angry at myself, at the life I thought we had, at the cracks I hadn't seen forming beneath the surface. Lindsay, meanwhile, was doing everything she could to prove her commitment to fixing our marriage. She went to therapy twice a week, showed me every message she received, and kept me informed about her day, no matter how mundane. It was exhausting for both of us, but I could see that she was trying. The problem was, I wasn't sure if it was enough. During our next session with Dr. Simmons, the topic of forgiveness came up. Rebuilding trust after an affair is one of the hardest things a couple can face, Dr. Simmons said, her voice calm but firm. Forgiveness is a critical part of the process, but it doesn't mean forgetting what happened or excusing the behavior. It's about letting go of the anger and resentment so you can move forward, together or separately. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. I don't know if I can forgive her, I admitted. Lindsay looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and sadness. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, she said softly. I just want the chance to prove that I'm worth it. Dr. Simmons nodded. It's a process, and it's different for everyone. What's important is that you're honest with yourself about what you're feeling and what you need. That evening, Lindsay and I sat down together after Emily went to bed. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. Do you think we can come back from this? Lindsay asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at the coffee table, unsure how to answer. I don't know, I said honestly. Some days it feels like we're making progress. Other days I can't get the images out of my head. She nodded, her expression pained. I hate what I've done to us. To you. If I could take it back, I would. But you can't, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. You can't undo what happened, Lindsay. You can't erase the fact that you made a choice that destroyed everything we had. Her shoulders slumped, and she wiped at her eyes. I know, she whispered. The silence that followed was heavy, but for the first time, it didn't feel suffocating. It felt like we were finally acknowledging the weight of what had happened instead of trying to push it aside. Over the next few weeks, we continued our therapy sessions and started setting small goals for rebuilding trust. Dr. Simmons suggested we schedule time each week to focus on reconnecting, whether it was a date night, a walk together, or simply sitting down to talk without distractions. At first, it felt awkward, almost forced. But as time went on, those moments started to feel less like obligations and more like glimpses of the relationship we'd once had. One evening, we decided to go for a drive, something we used to do all the time when we were dating. The air between us was still tinged with tension, but as the miles passed, it began to ease. "I miss this," Lindsay said, staring out the window. "Me too," I admitted. She glanced at me, her eyes filled with a tentative hope. "Do you think we'll ever get back to us?" I sighed, gripping the steering wheel. "I don't know. But I think we owe it to ourselves, and to Emily, to try." That night, for the first time in months, I felt a small spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. But the road ahead was still far from clear. As the weeks turned into months, Lindsay and I continued the painstaking process of rebuilding our marriage. Therapy sessions became a regular fixture in our lives, and while progress was slow, there were moments when it felt like we were moving in the right direction. But no matter how much effort Lindsay put into earning back my trust, the doubt lingered. It crept into my thoughts at random times, when she left the room to take a phone call, when she smiled a little too brightly while texting someone, or when she stayed late at work. Even though she'd shown me her messages and kept me in the loop, I couldn't stop myself from questioning her every move. And then there were the nights. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the memory of her and Tyler. No amount of therapy or honest conversations could erase the image of her laughing with him in that hotel room, the way she leaned into him in the reunion photo, or the flirty texts they'd exchanged. It was like a splinter lodged in my mind, impossible to remove. One night, unable to sleep, I got up and went downstairs. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a glass of water and replaying the events of the past few months. Lindsay found me there an hour later. She looked tired, her hair messy from sleep. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. "No," I said, not looking at her. She sat down across from me, folding her hands on the table. "I know it's hard," she said. "I know I've given you every reason to doubt me. But I'm trying, Sam. I really am." "I know," I said, my voice flat. "But it's not just about you trying. It's about me, not being able to let it go." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against mine. "What can I do to help?" I pulled my hand away, shaking my head. "I don't know if there's anything you can do, Lindsay. This isn't just about what you did, it's about what I can't forget." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't push me. Instead, she nodded and went back upstairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The next day, I called Dr. Simmons and scheduled an individual session for myself. I needed a space to talk about everything that was swirling around in my head without the pressure of Lindsay being there. During the session, I poured out everything: my anger, my sadness, my guilt for not being able to move on. "It feels like I'm stuck," I admitted. "Like no matter how much progress we make, I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop." Dr. Simmons nodded thoughtfully. "It's completely normal to feel that way after experiencing a betrayal like this. Your trust has been broken, and your mind is trying to protect you from being hurt again." "But what if I can't ever trust her again?" I asked. "What if this doubt never goes away?" "That's something only you can decide," she said gently. "Rebuilding trust is a two-way street, but it also requires you to take a leap of faith. If you can't do that, then you may need to consider whether staying in the marriage is truly the best choice for both of you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I knew she was right. That evening, I sat down with Lindsay and told her about the session. "I'm trying, Lindsay," I said, my voice heavy. "But I don't know if I can get past this. And if I can't, it's not fair to either of us to keep pretending like everything will be okay." She looked at me, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. "I don't want to give up on us," she said. "I'll keep fighting for as long as it takes. But if you decide you can't, I'll understand." Her words broke something inside me. I hated that we were even having this conversation, that our lives had come to this. "I just need more time," I said finally. "I'm not ready to make any decisions yet." She nodded, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Take all the time you need." The days that followed were quieter. Lindsay and I talked less, but it wasn't out of avoidance. It was like we were both giving each other the space we needed to process everything. She continued with her individual therapy, and so did I, while Emily remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing between her parents. I started noticing the little things again. The way Lindsay made an effort to check in on me, even when I wasn't ready to talk. How she spent more time playing with Emily, her laughter genuine and unguarded. It was clear she was trying, not just for me, but for herself and our family. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Lindsay hesitated before speaking. "I've been thinking," she said, glancing at me. "About what?" I asked, rinsing a plate. "About us," she said carefully. "I know you're not ready to forgive me yet, and I don't expect you to be. But I was wondering if you'd be willing to start over, in small steps." I turned to look at her, unsure of what she meant. "Start over?" She nodded, her expression earnest. "Like maybe we could go on a date. No pressure, no expectations. Just a chance to reconnect." Part of me wanted to say no. The idea of pretending everything was normal felt impossible. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good times we'd shared, was curious. "All right," I said after a moment. "But just one date." Her face lit up with cautious hope. "That's all I'm asking." We decided to keep it simple. Dinner at a small Italian restaurant we used to love when we were first married. As we walked into the cozy, dimly lit space, memories of our early days together came rushing back. Lindsay seemed nervous, her hands fidgeting with her napkin as we sat down. "It feels weird being out like this," she admitted. "Weird how?" I asked. "Like, I don't know," she said, smiling faintly. "Like I'm trying to win you back or something." I raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you?" Her cheeks flushed, and she nodded. "I guess I am." The honesty in her answer caught me off guard, and for the first time in a long while, I found myself smiling, just a small one, but it was real. As the night went on, the conversation flowed more naturally. We reminisced about the early days of our marriage, laughing at old stories and inside jokes. It felt almost normal, like we were two people rediscovering each other after being lost for so long. But there was still a weight hanging over us, a shadow that neither of us could ignore. "Do you think we can really move past this?" Lindsay asked as we finished dessert, her voice hesitant. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But tonight feels different. Like maybe there's still something worth fighting for." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't sad. "I hope so," she whispered. When we got home, Emily was asleep, and the house was quiet. As we stood in the hallway, Lindsay hesitated, then reached out and took my hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For giving me a chance," she said. "For not giving up on us." I didn't respond, but I gave her hand a small squeeze before letting go. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't a promise, but it was a step. That night, for the first time in months, I fell asleep without lying awake for hours. The pain was still there, but it felt a little less heavy, like maybe, just maybe, things could get better. The date had gone better than I expected, and for a brief moment, it felt like there was hope. But the reality of what we were dealing with didn't disappear overnight. The anger, the betrayal, the doubt, it all lingered, like ghosts that refused to leave. The following week, we attended another therapy session with Dr. Simmons. This time, the focus was on moving forward. "You've both done a lot of hard work to get to this point," she said, her calm gaze shifting between us. "But rebuilding trust is a long process. There will be setbacks, and it's important to address them when they happen instead of letting them fester. Lindsay nodded earnestly, while I leaned back in my chair, skeptical. What kind of setbacks? I asked. Triggers, unresolved anger, moments of doubt. Dr. Simmons explained. They're normal, but they can also be destructive if not handled with care. I couldn't help but scoff. So, basically, I just have to keep reliving it every time something reminds me of what happened. Dr. Simmons didn't flinch. It's not about reliving it. It's about learning to process those emotions in a healthy way, together. Ignoring them won't make them go away. I didn't respond, but her words stuck with me. A few days later, Lindsay and I were having dinner when my phone buzzed with a text from Brian. Got a minute to talk? It read. I frowned, texting him back a quick, "What's up?" before setting my phone down. Who was that? Lindsay asked, her tone casual. Brian, I said. Probably just wants to check in. She nodded, but I noticed the way her shoulders tensed slightly. After dinner, I stepped outside to call Brian. He picked up on the first ring. Hey, he said. I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but I figured you'd want to know. My stomach tightened. What is it? Tyler's back in town, he said. I saw him at the coffee shop near my place this morning. He was talking to someone about some work project or whatever, but it sounded like he's planning to stick around for a while. I felt a rush of anger and dread. Great, I muttered. Just what I needed. I figured you'd want a heads up, Brian said. Yeah, I said. Thanks. I hung up, my mind racing. Tyler being back in town was the last thing I needed, especially with how fragile things still were between Lindsay and me. When I went back inside, Lindsay was in the living room, flipping through a magazine. She looked up as I walked in. Everything okay? She asked. Brian saw Tyler this morning, I said bluntly. Apparently he's back in town. Her face went pale, and she set the magazine down. Oh? Oh? I repeated, my voice sharp. That's all you have to say? I didn't know, she said quickly. I haven't talked to him since everything happened. I studied her face, looking for any sign that she was lying. You swear? Yes, she said firmly. I blocked him, Sam. You know that. I have no reason to talk to him. I wanted to believe her, but the doubt crept in anyway. Okay, I said finally, though my tone was less than convincing. She reached for my hand, her expression pleading. You have to trust me on this. I'm not the same person I was then. I'm trying, Sam. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. That night, I lay awake again, my thoughts consumed by Tyler's return. What if he tried to contact Lindsay? What if she wasn't as over him as she claimed to be? The questions gnawed at me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't silence them. By the time morning came, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Lindsay noticed immediately. Rough night? She asked gently. Yeah, I said, not meeting her eyes. Was it about Tyler? She asked, her voice soft. I nodded. I don't trust him. And I don't trust that he'll stay away from you. She placed a hand on mine, her touch warm and steady. I can't control what he does, but I can promise you that I won't let him back into our lives. You have my word, Sam. Her sincerity was clear, but my mind was still at war with itself. Lindsay's reassurance helped, but the news of Tyler's return lingered like a storm cloud over everything. I tried to focus on work, therapy, and reconnecting with Lindsay, but my mind kept circling back to him. What if he tried to worm his way back into her life? What if she let him? I hated feeling like this, paranoid, mistrustful. It wasn't who I used to be. But the betrayal had changed me, and as much as I wanted to move forward, the scars wouldn't let me. One afternoon, I got home from work early and decided to surprise Lindsay. She'd mentioned taking Emily to the park, and I figured it might be nice to join them for a change. As I pulled into the parking lot, I spotted them near the swings. Emily was laughing as Lindsay pushed her, her small hands gripping the chains tightly. I was about to get out of the car when I noticed someone standing nearby, a tall figure leaning casually against a tree. My heart dropped. Tyler. I stayed in the car, watching as he approached Lindsay. She looked surprised to see him, her body stiffening as he said something to her. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I saw the way her eyes darted around nervously, like she was trying to figure out what to do. Emily, oblivious to the tension, continued playing on the swings. I clenched the steering wheel, my anger boiling over. This was exactly what I'd feared. He was trying to insert himself back into her life, and she hadn't told me a thing about it. I got out of the car and walked toward them, my steps heavy with purpose. As I approached, Tyler noticed me first. His smug grin appeared instantly, and I wanted nothing more than to wipe it off his face. "Sam," he said, his tone oozing with fake friendliness. "Long time, no see." "Get out of here, Tyler," I said coldly, stepping between him and Lindsay. "Relax," he said, holding up his hands. "I was just saying hi. No harm in that, right?" "Leave," I repeated, my voice sharp. Tyler glanced at Lindsay, who was pale and wide-eyed. All right, he said, backing away with a smirk. "I'll see you around." "No, you won't," I snapped. He walked off, his casual stride infuriatingly relaxed. Once he was gone, I turned to Lindsay. "What the hell was that? I didn't know he was going to be here," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "I swear, Sam, I haven't talked to him." "Then why did he come up to you?" I demanded. "I don't know," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I was just as surprised as you were." Emily called out from the swings, breaking the tension. "Mommy, can you push me again?" "I'll do it," I said, my tone clipped. Lindsay nodded, stepping back as I walked over to Emily. That evening, after Emily was in bed, Lindsay sat down across from me at the kitchen table. "I know you don't believe me," she said softly. "But I didn't want to see him. I didn't even know he was back in town until you told me." "Then why didn't you walk away when he approached you?" I asked, my voice filled with frustration. "Because I didn't want to cause a scene in front of Emily," she said. "I was trying to figure out how to get away without upsetting her." Her explanation made sense, but the anger inside me refused to let go. "If he comes near you again, you need to tell me immediately," I said. "I will," she promised. "I mean it, Lindsay," I said, my voice hard. "No more secrets. No more lies." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I promise, Sam. I won't let him ruin what we're trying to rebuild." For the next few days I was on edge, constantly checking my phone and looking over my shoulder whenever we were out. I hated feeling like this, but I couldn't help it. Tyler's presence was a threat I couldn't ignore, and the thought of him trying to manipulate Lindsay again made my blood boil. But something was different this time. Lindsay was more transparent than ever, keeping me updated on everything and going out of her way to reassure me. It didn't erase the pain, but it started to chip away at the doubt. The encounter with Tyler lingered in my mind like a shadow, but as the days passed, I began to notice a shift. Lindsay was different, more present, more open. It was like she had finally let go of whatever hold Tyler had on her, and was focusing entirely on our family. She started initiating conversations, not just about us but about everything. She'd ask how my day was, suggest family outings, and even bring up our therapy sessions without prompting. Slowly, I found myself responding in kind. It wasn't easy. Every step forward felt precarious, like one wrong move could send us tumbling back into the abyss. But for the first time in months, it felt like we were walking in the same direction. One evening, as we were putting Emily to bed, Lindsay paused in the doorway, watching me read her a story. When I finished, Emily gave me a sleepy smile and mumbled, "Love you, Daddy." "Love you too, sweetheart," I said, tucking her in and kissing her forehead. As I turned off the light and closed the door, I saw Lindsay wiping her eyes. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice soft. "Nothing," she said, smiling through her tears. "I'm just grateful. For you. For her. For us. Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Finally, I nodded. Me too. The next day, I made a decision. It wasn't easy, and I wasn't entirely sure I was ready, but I knew it was time to take the next step. After dinner, I sat Lindsay down at the kitchen table. We need to talk, I said, my tone serious. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. Okay. I took a deep breath. I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything that's happened. And I realized something. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were locked on mine, waiting. I still love you, I said, my voice steady. And I want to keep trying. For us, for Emily, for everything we've built together. Her face crumpled as tears spilled down her cheeks. Sam, she whispered, her voice trembling. But, I continued, this isn't going to be easy. I'm still hurt. I still have doubts. And I need you to understand that it's going to take time, maybe a lot of time, before I can truly trust you again. I understand, she said quickly, wiping her tears. I'll do whatever it takes. I just want the chance to show you that I'm committed to us. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my chest. Then let's take it one day at a time. Over the next few weeks, we focused on rebuilding, one small step at a time. We continued therapy, both individually and as a couple. We spent more time together as a family, creating new memories to replace the painful ones. There were setbacks, of course, moments when the anger and doubt would resurface. But each time, we faced them together instead of retreating into silence. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lindsay reached over and took my hand. Thank you, she said softly. For what? I asked. For not giving up on me, she said. For giving us another chance. I looked at her, the woman I'd loved for so many years, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. I'm not ready to forgive you completely, I said honestly. But I'm starting to believe that maybe we can get there someday. She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. That's enough for me. In the months that followed, we continued to rebuild our lives together. It wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be. But we were trying, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were on the same team again. As I watched Emily run across the yard one sunny afternoon, her laughter ringing out like music, I realized something. Life is messy, and people make mistakes, sometimes unforgivable ones. But sometimes, forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about choosing to build a future despite it. And that's what we were doing, one day at a time.